Adaptability is a beautiful human feature. We've adapted from not being squished by a dinosaur to not being run over by a car. It's the same effect, but different vehicles that are squishing us.
So this isn't for today. This isn't for tomorrow. This is a long-term change. So welcome to the first episode of the Compassiviste podcast. My name is Daniel Klein. I'm excited to be a part of this and go through this journey. As the first podcast, there's introductions and welcomes to be made, I think. First, maybe a quick introduction for yourself, Ali?
Sure. Ali Horriyat here. I'm the founder of Compassiviste, and it's been a journey coming all the way here to Compassiviste, which started as many different entities until this point here.
The purpose of this podcast is really to highlight a couple of core things around what it is to be a compassiviste, especially in the first couple of episodes. We're really going to be focusing on what the meaning is, what the implications are, and how you as individuals can get involved to collectively help the shared future of humanity. It sounds a little high level and it sounds a little philosophical, but I think as we get through this podcast and the series in a little bit more depth, it's going to be clear about how you can get involved and what you can do to make a meaningful impact in not only your life, but the lives of others. The idea here being that we're going to focus on how our shared future as humanity comes together and supports one another through the voices, through the stories, and through the past of some pretty special people. You could be a special person too if you get involved. So as you listen to these podcasts and as you explore the stories and narratives and paths of each person that we highlight in this series, take into consideration that you very much, with minor changes or no changes, could be these people. You could be a compassiviste. You could activate. You could make a difference in other people's lives. And so I'm excited to be a part of that for this reason. It's going to be a great journey. This first episode, Ali and I are going to be focusing on the foundations of what it is to be a compassiviste, the story behind the inception. Ali, would you like to take us through kind of your motives, your intents, and the founding of Compassiviste?
Sure. So I used to be a trader, a day trader. And one day on a lunch break, I quit my life. I drove back instead of to the office from the restaurant. I drove back from lunch to the airport. And the airport was the starting point. Got on a flight, never came back. I traveled for about 5 years on a finding myself spiritual journey to start, because I was not happy. I was making a tremendous amount of money and I was just getting a little bit more miserable by the day. And so one thing led to another, and I thought maybe I need to get away and I need to find myself and regroup and restart. And what I found in the first year was I was hopping from 5-star resort to 5-star resort, traveling the world, and nothing was changing. There was no spiritual influences whatsoever. So what I did is I gave away everything, every penny, every asset, every home, every car, everything gone. I did that, and that was the start of me traveling, continuing to travel and seeing life from a very different lens. And that was the beginning of me chronicling and journaling what I was experiencing. And so the writing began. And I thought I would dedicate the writing to allowing people to read and maybe ignite within themselves the same experience, the same desire to have a spiritual awakening, to want to do more than just make a lot of money, which was seemingly everybody's goal around me. And so I started contacting a few people who I knew from the past. And as the conversations began, in the same way the conversations began between us, I quickly realized the writing was not the path. There needed to be more activism. There needed to be more interaction. There needed to be a louder voice than just books. So, and there needed to be a vehicle. And my first vehicle was a charity. So I registered Compassiviste Foundation, which started as a different entity, different name. And slowly, as the Compassiviste word kept getting thrown around in my conversations, because I was looking for a word that meant activism with compassion, or a compassionate activist in the process. And there was a lot of activism around the world. There still is, but a lot of it was dedicated to different kinds of processes. People were protesting things through their activism. They were not actually coming in from a spiritual perspective thinking, hey, I want to be an activist in the sense of making a change that makes the world better in an overall perspective. So I thought compassionate activism, lead with compassion, lead with love. And that's where Compassiviste really started and sprouted. And so once we had that, I thought, okay, the charity, the books, there's no voice. How do I get a voice out? And one thing led to another, and the idea of a podcast came about, and the idea of dialogues, and the idea of sharing the same perspective with many different people. And here we are on this first episode of that voice. And the goal really is to use this voice, to use this platform, to use this amplification to bring out all the things that we think we should do from a personal to a social to a spiritual perspective and goal to make that difference, to make the change. And that's where it starts.
That sounds like a really inspiring future, highlighting all these stories, sharing all these experiences, understanding how humanity is a interconnected group. And when we hurt one person, we hurt ourselves. There's a couple of tenets that are required to be or call yourself a compassiviste. So the first one being commitment to the mission. So
right.
Commitment to the mission, the number one aspect of being a compassiviste. Ali, what does that mean for you?
For me, it starts with your intent. So to create a mission, in essence, you are creating an intent to do something. And that is why vision statements and mission statements are really tied together in a lot of spaces. Whether you look at corporate websites, whether you look at people with resolutions, it's always a high-level vision that is the end goal of the process. And then you have a mission, which is, how do I get to that vision? And so the mission, it is simply a process of reaching that vision statement. And here, commitment to the mission is, how can we commit to a better world, a world with much less suffering, if we don't have the spiritual intent of getting there and reaching there and making those changes? So commitment in this sense comes through that willingness to ignite the change and make a very big difference from within, so that this starts to activate and show in everyday actions, in high-level actions, in everyday decisions, and in high-level decisions. You can start by, for example, changing your diet, eating healthier on a day-to-day basis. But the high-level result of this 2 years down the line is going to be significant. And it is that process of suffering to commit to the goal for the betterment. That's what I think it means to me.
Transparency and accountability is our second tenet. To me, it means being open and honest about transactions, partnerships, intents, and outcomes, and always being truthful when it comes to what we said we were going to do and what we actually did, and then sharing that message and story with everyone else. There's a lot of people out there in the world who will say one thing and do another. There's a lot of people out there who will say one thing and they'll do it, but then they won't share that message with the group. And I want it to be so, as a compassiviste, you're not only taking action and you're living up to the values that you say you live up to, but you're also being transparent in a way that is always beyond reproach. When everyone comes to you and says, what about this? Did that happen? Where did this go? Who was here? There's an honest and transparent answer that is consistent with the rest of our core values. Ali, what would you say?
I fully agree. And I think in today's world, I don't put too much weight on transparency because I believe the accountability factor pulls in transparency from both ends, the consumer and the producer, or the consumer and whatever other side of the equation we're trying to fix through the consumer. So in this sense, as a consumer myself, taking the diet example, I walk into a grocery store. I should hold myself accountable to what I am purchasing or what I am consuming. The transparency on the other side is coming through me because I could research and find what I need to be transparent about. So I think there's an onus on the consumer today to want, and that is the activism of wanting the transparency and being held accountable to that in the first place. So placing blame on others is exactly the problem that we've been having for many decades in the activism world, where we simply place blame on others. We say, oh, there's an oil spill. It's the oil company's fault. No, it's everybody's fault. If we look at it that way, because we didn't take the transparency of the oil company at its offset on its website, on its statements everywhere else, and on its overproductions and logistical details, and consumed the product without any issue. And now all of a sudden, here we are in a disastrous state. So I think they go hand in hand, but I want to tell people not to think of this as a transparency of the corporation, so to speak, which is what tends to go around the world today when we speak of transparency. And it leads right into the next one, integrity and honesty.
Does.
It does. That is the point that really speaks out to transparency and accountability, is the integrity and the honesty. In the integrity portion, I think this is what it is. This is the taking it onto yourself. And I think integrity is the social aspect of it, as opposed to the transparency, which is a personal aspect. So with integrity, you are committing to a social, equal approach that what I want for myself is what I want for everybody else. And whether I'm a corporation or a self or a person or a human, I would want that to reflect everywhere.
Having a transparent approach that we hold ourselves accountable to and focuses on kind of the greater good in our mission set. And I think that also leads into our fourth tenet being partnership approach. And it's all kind of building up into our partnership approach, where when you are transparent and accountable and you have integrity and honesty and you focus on partnerships, what you mentioned earlier, Ali, about not blaming others. I mean, we're all equally guilty. Christ, like he who is without sin casts the first stone, right? It's like we're all in this. We are all at some level operating in the gray when it comes to environmental issues, social, economic issues. It's not a person's fault. It's not a company's fault. We're all in this. So pointing fingers and blame doesn't really do anyone any good.
You're right. You're absolutely right. This is what I keep coming back to. And it speaks volumes to our ability to integrate socially, to create that collective or develop it, so to speak. Civilization is essentially a collective, and we live in this collective. However, we have somehow altogether chosen to maneuver this collective towards a momentum of prioritizing certain things over others, such as capitalism over the social good. And so at this point, when we have all these limitations that we need to abide by to maintain a somewhat social growth within a capitalist structure, it starts telling you that we have problems, and we're reaching those limits in those problems. And so we have these issues of integrity and honesty and partnership approach and how to negotiate that. And I think it comes back again to, all of the tenets together when we think, how do we create the best social outcome that we can together?
Agree. Yeah, it all comes together to how do you work together? How do you partner with others? Knowing that everyone is in this boat, everyone is to blame partially. There's no reason to point fingers because we're all in this. And then when it's just the expectation is when we work with each other, we are transparent, because if we're not transparent, then it becomes even more difficult to partner. So as long as you're transparent and honest and you have integrity, we will understand and, empathize with circumstances that you might be in that resulted in the actions that you took, which got us into the position that we're in. It's not that we're to blame. It's that we are a product of our circumstance in so many regards. And as long as we're open and honest and transparent with each other about those circumstances, and we don't try and hide anything or hold anything back, then we can actually make progress. We can actually make partnerships. So these tenets are kind of building on each other a little bit, I feel.
Very much so. And exactly to continue from there, the next tenet is actually corporate responsibility. And introducing this is really taking on from the previous ones, because you said we need to be transparent, we need to be honest, we need to have integrity. But what if we have no responsibility while having those? Being honest and doing something bad means nothing. Being honest, being integral in my evil is not a good thing. But when you bring responsibility into it, then you're telling someone not only are they accountable so that they fear the punishment or the repercussion that comes along with their action in their transparency and in their honesty and in their integrity, but now they have a responsibility for their action. So now, if I'm guilty of not being in a performative manner adding to the betterment of society, I need to feel responsible. I need to be responsible, and I need to retrace my steps to fix what I've caused damage in, which again becomes every single one of us without blame, because a company or a corporation cannot produce damage without me purchasing damage, in a sense. So it goes both ways.
It's ownership over the context and the circumstances that might harm others or yourself. If we owned our garbage, if we had ownership over our garbage instead of just throwing it out, maybe we would be in a better place. Collectively, personally.
Well said.
Life-centric approach is our next tenet. Ali, would you like to walk us through life-centric approach?
Yes. So to me, life-centric means we prioritize life. And the reason we're using life-centric here, which could mean different things in different worlds and different academic niches, but let's use it this way. Life-centric means centralized around the promotion and protection of life. And all the approaches that you can think of, the one that should mean the most and should be prioritized is the protection of life. I mean, when civilization comes together, when we have technology, when there are advancements, there's progress in any field, it is essentially performed to make life better, to make life easier, to advance life, to protect life, to secure life. And so when we do that, it should not be at the expense of other lives, whether these lives are mammals, reptiles, plants, humans, it doesn't matter. It's a life. And when we start functioning outside of a life-centric approach, it becomes a paradoxical goal. What is the point of a technology if it is meant for disaster? Nobody would do it. If you told anybody today, here, let's create this so it can kill us, I don't think anybody would go and do that. But we do it because we have moved away from the priority of a life-centric approach. That is why we are where we are today, partially. So this tenet really is a reversal. So it is reversing our steps, retracing, going back, and finding that diversion point and taking the right step out of the fork.
Respect for diversity and inclusion. I think this goes a lot farther than just the concept in the Western world of diversity and inclusion. When you say diversity and inclusion, you don't, in my mind, really think about diversity and inclusion. You think about focusing on small groups and emphasizing their messages, but you don't, it's almost an anti-diversity and inclusion when you focus on diversity and inclusion and you're not actually being open and honest and caring of everyone, no matter what. Love everyone. Love your neighbor as yourself. That, to me, is what this means.
It's very true. And I often say this. I say you would have to have some racist lens to see race.
Right.
You would have to have some racist lens to be able to say, in the inclusivity of this movement, corporation, charity, whatever the entity is, I am employing or I am entering these people or these issues. It shouldn't be that way. We should step way beyond that. But the problem is when you discuss this, it becomes somewhat because as you said, the West leads the conversation on this and kind of takes ownership on this. And part of the reason is there's a lot more multiculturalism in the West than there is in the East. In fact, you go to India and there aren't that many very visible races that are living there. Whereas you go to, say, Canada, and it's a very multicultural country. So inclusivity, diversity, race, these are conversations that sound so much more different in a place like Canada or the United States than even in Mexico, which is just south of the border. So what really do we mean by respect for diversity? Or what do we really mean by inclusion when we put it in as a tenet? Does it mean that we aim to have, a picture on our website with 5 different people from 3 different races with no majority in there and whatnot? No, that's not what we really mean. What we mean is we want to bring the conversation of everybody from every sector, from every part of the collective into the priority, into the essential, into why this is happening and how we are, again, a part of this problem. For there to be a minority issue in a country, there needs to be a majority problem for that to occur. There are minorities in many countries in the world who don't feel necessarily targeted or, in any kind of harm. They're thriving, they're happy. There are majorities in some parts of the world that are in harm. So the corporate structure of this conversation doesn't really speak to the spiritual mission of it. And here at Compassiviste, I think one of the things we want to do with reforming a social order is to reform the political and economic dialogues in this case of inclusivity and race and other issues, even gender today.
I think there's a lot of implications with this one. It's almost a reflection of corporate responsibility or partnership approach, but from the personal, individual standpoint, where we understand and almost are blind to any kind of difference. We are human. We are the same. We are each other.
And when we do that, we really hurt ourselves because we open the passage for fanaticism. We open the passage. We open pathways for people to come in and become fundamentalists. Today, you have huge protests, people at schools, parents at schools fighting in developed countries over LGBTQ issues, throwing fists over LGBTQ issues. This happens because we raise these issues in a way of either this or that. It's always either this or that. That's not inclusive. When you say either this or that, you're excluding the part that don't agree with you. Every part that does not agree with you, you're excluding in that conversation, and you're labeling in that conversation. An inclusive aspect would be to not have that distinction. And I think that is the respect factor of it. That is the important part of the conversation that we need to have as a dialogue. We need to have as a roundtable, which is not happening today because, again, corporate influences through the media, corporate influences through many different spheres that advance the capitalist cause of having these kind of exclusivities.
There's a lot of historical context around this too.
Yeah.
Neocolonialism, colonialism, the context in which we find ourselves today, and then the diversity and inclusion aspect of that. Meaning, if the country, the people were victims of colonization, and what position does that put them in today? But where does that put us as Compassivistes trying to propel humanity to a better place in a shared future? So maybe it's an understanding of people's past and an understanding of the context we find ourselves in today, but then a focus on the future and not necessarily focusing on the past. Not to erase the past, not to whitewash it, not to circumvent the troubles and issues and life-changing circumstances that people find themselves in today, understanding those things, but then still keeping a focus on the past instead of continuously falling back to paradigms that don't support a shared future.
And I call this trial and error.
Right.
Trial and error. You use the past as trial and error. We've made so many mistakes in the past that we can use as a scientific approach, as trial and error. And we don't need to recommit to these mistakes. And the reason we do recommit to these mistakes, you have cyclical theories that are from hundreds of years ago, and they are true today. We always say history repeats itself. Why does history repeat itself? Is this a natural repetition? Can we never escape it? And if we can't escape it, then why are we having this conversation at all? But we can.
Right.
We know we can. We know we force the circular model on ourselves. And we know we commit those mistakes because it happens over and over again, and we make the same mistakes over because the ego and the self is not spiritual. And so again, it ties into the commitment to the mission. You need to be committed to continue this walk. Christ was committed. Judas wasn't committed. Christ walked and he ended up on a cross. Judas didn't walk. He ended up hanging from a tree. The end was no different, but the impact and the momentum of each walk was very different. The Compassiviste walk is towards social betterment, which is what Christ was bringing, not from a religious perspective. I mean, you could be secular and still have this conversation. Here's a person, a human, who tried to tell people, love each other, don't hurt each other. And here's another person who said, I could make some money getting this guy killed. I'll do that. And we repeat that today, don't we? We do this today. There are shootings everywhere. There are killings everywhere. We repeat it today for money. Same concept, 2,000 years later. That's a cyclical issue. Why? The same spiritual problem of back then. Then they used a cross and nails and a hammer maybe. And today we use a gun. Vehicles have changed. Concepts the same. Which ties us to logic, which is the next tenet, the logic approach. Do you want to talk about that or should I?
Would you like to?
Okay. So the logic approach, to me, again, logic is a word I use so that I don't have to use science. And the reason being, when you say I'm taking a scientific approach or I'm taking the science route to something, you're essentially saying that I'm doing what I feel I know and other people also agree to know that is correct today. But it's not a fact. It's not an eternal fact. Before Galileo, before Copernicus, before some scientific discovery, there was a fact. And it was the world was Earth-centric. And that was a fact everybody believed. At some point, the Earth was flat. And that was a fact everybody believed. Maybe some still do. But regardless, science has disproved that. But at some point, we keep changing. And there is an evolution to science. There is a cultural evolution in science. Science is highly dogmatic, is as dogmatic as religion. But we follow science because it gives us certain tenets and certain results that can be proven, in a sense, evidential. Whereas with religion, it can't. So the dogma becomes apparent. The delusion becomes apparent. The illusion becomes apparent. But with science, no, we have an answer. Here's an equation. It works in every circumstance. It must be true. But in science, we sometimes fail. Eugenics was a science. It was a science that the government of the United States held as fact at one point in its history. Undisputed history, undisputed fact. But was eugenics a fact? It wasn't. It was science, but it wasn't fact. So what I like to say is, let's take the logic approach. The logic approach is essentially something I learned from religion, actually, which is the funny part. So I was speaking to an Islamic mullah, and I asked the mullah, I said, how do you know the Quran is what it was when it was released, meditated, when it came, however you want to call it. When it came in verses, how do you know this was what it was? And it's true to its core and it's never changed. And all over the world, it's the same text. And that's what Muslims are proud about. They say, well, the Bible has different variations. Other books have different variations. Some are lost. We don't even know where they're, but the Quran, it's the same one from 1400 years. And he said, it doesn't really matter if the text is intact. What matters is the Quran says one thing that's very interesting. It says, if you find anything that doesn't feel logical, then it probably isn't part of the spiritual message. And Muhammad, who delivered the Quran, said the same thing, said, in my words, or when history comes and they say, I said so and so, and I said such and such, if you think that it doesn't flow with a natural logic of the world you see around you, then I probably never said it. Don't be dogmatic. And so I took that from religion and I applied it to science. And I said, okay, if I see something that is scientific, that is modeled on science, should I not apply some level of educated guessing to it? Because I could show you articles in science for and against the same topic or concept. And we know today a lot of science is paid for by research from many corporations to reflect what they want to see and hear onto media, onto the public. So how do I know which is the right science. And you see this a lot in the pet industry. There's a lot of science that tells you what's good for dogs and what's not good for dogs. And they go against each other very often. So can I take a scientific approach by saying it's labeled in a scientific journal or article, I will follow this because I'm not going to use my logic. I'm not going to use my intelligence. No. I think we should all use a level of logic to validate the science. And in this sense, it goes back and it ties in really to the inclusion and diversity, for me at least. And the way it ties into that tenet is when you take the logic approach and eugenics comes along, you can take a step back and say, this doesn't feel right. When Hitler comes along and some scientists turn around and say, we have proven that the Aryan race is superior and the others should die, you can take a step back and say, no, it just doesn't flow with my logic. There will be a lot of fanatic science that's coming out. And, with the progress of technology, it just will grow and grow. And how do we say no? Where do we say no? How do we know to say no? What do we follow? Organized religions are providing scientific evidence that they pay for their researches. A lot of delusional people go to these institutions, these churches, and these spaces, and they believe what is said, and they follow these structures, and they think it's science because God said so, and God can't be wrong. And if science disproves it, it's because science doesn't know better. So we don't know, but we can use logic. And to me, that is what the logic approach is. It's using science as a tool, but not being fooled by the dogma of science.
Using logic successfully implies that the person is intelligent, or at least average, most likely above average intelligence. So I imagine the typical, and this is not a marketing angle, I imagine the typical compassiviste is probably average to above average intelligence. But part of, in my mind, and this is going to sound almost comical, I kind of hope, half hope not, is diversity and inclusion is also tied to helping others who are maybe below average intelligence also use logic, or maybe helping guide them towards a better, more logical mindset. And that leads into the next tenet, adaptability and resilience, focusing on the resilience aspect. Ali, how would you describe adaptability and resilience in your words?
So before I get into that, I will respond to something you said. And that is people below average intelligence. And you would be surprised at how many people below average intelligence are open to education, because that is something they want. That is something they dream of. That is something they don't get. You go into some parts of the world that I've been to, and you provide education. You just tell them a story. You tell children a story. These are kids there's no school, there's no life, there's no future, there's nothing for them. The best they think of is a war so they can be active. Places like that in the world. I've been to places like that. You sit them down and you tell them a moral story, and you see how it lights their eyes up, how it gives them hope, how it says, oh, there's more to life than this. And so I believe with education, which takes us back actually to responsibility. If we have the responsibility and we make ourselves accountable to teach, to educate, we will be able to reach those spaces of, say, the uneducated and help because they're willing. My fear is not there at all, or my problem with that. And the issue of inclusion is not there at all. It's actually in the highest levels of education. So you have scientists, PhDs, debating intelligent design and evolution. Up until this moment, we don't have an answer. We don't have an answer that science can say, proven, no question about it, because there are scientific responses on both sides at the highest level of education. So how do you include both of those? Because you can't educate them anymore. You just have to accept them for what they are. Now, to answer that point, we don't just say whatever it is, some people will and some people won't. No, we can bring everybody under the Compassiviste umbrella, everybody. And how we do that is, let's take the astronomy, let's take the worldview. You're an evolutionist, you believe in intelligent design, that's fine. We really don't care about that. We care about how your beliefs can activate you to make a better change in the world. You can come in here and be an evolutionist. You can come in here and be secular. You can come in and be an atheist. And another person can come in here and be a Christian who doesn't miss church. And you can both side by side dig a well for people who don't have water. That well will still produce water. And that is the point of Compassiviste. We can both do that. Once we dig the water, let's grab a glass of water each and we can sit and discuss our differences. That is a beautiful way to discuss our differences, as opposed to saying, we're not going to dig the water together because the other person doesn't believe in my beliefs. That is the lack of inclusivity to me. So now going into adaptability and resilience, I think that example of the well plays into adaptability and resilience. When you're able to adapt for the greater good, and that's what humanity has done all of its history. We've adapted. We've adapted from not being squished by a dinosaur to not being run over by a car. It's the same effect. It's the same squishing, but different vehicles that are squishing us. Now we know we don't have to run from a dinosaur. So we've adapted our escape mechanisms to make sure we don't get run over by a car. And so adaptability is a beautiful human feature. We live everywhere on the planet. We're adaptable. Not a lot of mammals or animals can do that. You can't take a saltwater fish and put them in freshwater for the most part. You can take a human from an island in the Caribbean and put them in Manitoba in the winter, and they will still survive given the right clothing and whatnot, but they will still manage to survive because they will know to do those things. So we're highly adaptable on every level. And I think the laziness of humans is the factor in adaptability and resilience. Resilience is a matter of comfort. I'm comfortable where I am. I come home. I know the drill. I continue with it. To be adaptable to social issues, environmental issues, I have to come home and lose the resilience in the negative perspective and adapt to a positive aspect of life, changing habits for a better environment. And I have to maintain a positive resilience in fighting the aspects of adaptability within myself that are supporting a negative contribution to the environment. So should I fly every weekend, to some other destination because I can afford to? No. But that resilience to say no is a counter reaction to the adaptability of being wealthier and more capable of doing these fun experiences at whim. So it really goes both ways. You can look at resilience and adaptability from a positive to a negative perspective, and that turns back to the commitment issue. What are you committing to? Are you committing to a positive resilience and a positive adaptability, growing to a social betterment, or are you selfish in your resilience and adaptability? And that's how I see those playing out through the tenets, through what we aspire to achieve with the collective.
And then our long-term perspective. So this isn't for today. This isn't for tomorrow. This is a long-term change. This is something that's, as we activate, as we take on these projects, as we complete these projects and impact the world and humanity itself, there is going to be, through that adaptability, a new life. But it's not going to be today. It's not going to be tomorrow. Hopefully soon. But we need to focus on the long-term approach in my mind to make sure that we're not getting frustrated and we can stay resilient and we can stay focused and we can make this actually happen and stick.
Very true. And in short, you plant a palm tree, you're not going to see results for a long time, but you will see results for a long time from when you do start to see them. And that is the idea here, to be patient and to make that change and to hope for the results over the long term. And I think, again, not to look at this from a religious perspective, but to think of it spiritually. When moral changes have come throughout history, whether it was Moses' story or Jesus's or the coming of Islam or Buddha himself as a person, the biggest factor there was change for the greater good of the longer future. It wasn't for their moment in time, because Jesus was not aspiring to be king. Moses didn't even take that offer. I mean, this is a person, let's just stick to the story, took the Israelites from Egypt and walked them across the world at the time and gave them hope and a new life and freedom and everything. I'm pretty sure he could have ruled over them if he wanted to, but he didn't. We don't have new pyramids in Jerusalem saying this is what Moses did when he brought these people over here. So what he did was for the greater good. What he did was for liberty, for freedom, for respect, for inclusion, for all of the tenets that we try to raise, in a sense, And you look at all the other movements. You look at Gandhi, you look at MLK, you look at Mandela, you look at all these people, and all they've done is sacrifice, essentially, and suffer for the greater good. So today, and I give this example often of weight gain. If Daniel and I go on vacation for 2 years and we eat all the most delicious foods in the world, don't lift a finger, don't exercise, don't do anything. We come back at 300 pounds each. We can't sleep and wake up the next morning and expect to be 170 pounds. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of exercise. It's going to take a lot of changing diets. It's going to take a lot of pain. Getting on a treadmill at that weight is not easy on the joints. It's going to hurt your back. A lot of things are going to happen until you get back into shape, if you do. But if you're determined and dedicated over the long term, you will get to that result that is good for you. In the same sense, without suffering, people are delusional, thinking that we're going to reverse the climate issue. We're going to reverse social injustice. We're going to reverse all of these issues and suddenly appear at this lovely, harmonious enlightenment that everybody keeps thinking we're going to reach. You cannot strike a yoga pose and think tomorrow morning everything's going to be beautiful. There's a lot more that goes into that meditative skill. There's a lot more that goes into the work that is required to make that change. So I think the long-term perspective is really when you commit. I mean, this is tying the first to the last, the first tenet to the last tenet. You commit to the mission. What is the mission? It's a long-term perspective. Are you ready to commit to a long-term perspective? I'm not sitting here doing this so that I can help guide a collective to recycle for 1 month. That is useless. We could do so much better with our time. What we're doing is trying to make a collective change their lives forever. That is what will bring change. And if we can succeed doing that, which is the logical thing to do, we're in an existential crisis from many different perspectives. The logical thing to do is change course at the very least. You're driving off a cliff. The logical thing to do is try to steer away from it. It's not going straight at the cliff. So here we are trying to tell people, try steering away. So logic should do that. Logic should bring people together, and we should be able to steer in the right direction.
The core thing here, I think, is to consider that these tenets all work hand in hand, and they don't stand alone. They function as a collective, like we function as a collective. We don't single out a thing and focus on that thing, just like we don't focus on a tenet and single out that tenet. They work collectively together. They work hand in hand, and you've seen the conversation bounce back and forth between each of the different tenets multiple times throughout this conversation. And the idea is not to be a fundamentalist and focus on a thing. You're not resilient. You're not accountable. Or you are resilient. You are accountable. It's within the context of the tenets. Everything works hand in hand. Everything works together for the greater good, for the shared common good. That's the idea.
Yep. And you see this in every aspect of the world that is successful. So you come from a marketing background, you come from a military background, and in both, you could attest to the fact that your collective saves you. The military is not a one-man show. No soldier, other than a very few handful of heroes, save the day by themselves. The majority go in as a group, and they come out as a group, and they trust their lives in each other. So I'm sure you can speak better to that, but that's how I see it. And I think the success is based on that trust and that responsibility and accountability and transparency and all those words in there in the tenets that really tie everybody into one person, essentially going in, a core unit, as you said. And you see it in merchandising too. I mean, you look at Apple as a company, and all their products work together. They sync, which is why I use Apple because it's so easy for somebody who's not tech savvy like myself to use Apple because everything syncs to each other. So when people ask me for documents or other things that I'm not very too familiar with, as you know, it's easy for me to send through because it all works on one system. So everything works hand in hand in a sense, and it makes it easier for me to be successful at it. Now, if this wasn't the case and I had to learn a different technology for each aspect of my social life, my personal life, my working life, I probably would have to take courses. It would be so much harder. That's what I'm trying to say. Whereas if I have one mechanism to work with, makes it so much easier for me to be successful. And the collective is about that. The collective is about finding your part in the mechanism so that it makes it fluid and it makes it simple and it makes it transparent. And it brings that partnership approach to make one collective, one Compassiviste to flow forward. Sure. And before we talk about anything else and before we stop today, I really want to remind people that this show is about inviting people to join and to ignite and to activate. And to do that, we're looking for a specific set of people. We are looking for qualities within every individual that are available. We're not looking for a skill set that needs to be trained in a specific manner. We're looking for people to activate certain aspects of their traits and their essence as a human, their innate, essential information pieces within their DNA. So, the commitment to the mission, we're looking for people who are committed. We're looking for people who are willing to be transparent in their actions, people who take accountability and responsibility for their actions, people who are team players. This is a collective. There is no I in a collective. We're looking for people who are willing to assume a life-centric approach. A life-centric approach is core to the mission. Within that is the inclusivity of people, humans of all kinds, animals of all kinds, plants in the environment, respect for diversity of all kinds of humans, and to take a logical approach, a logic-based approach. We're not going to sign off to any dogmatic systems here, whether it is an organized religion, whether it's a scientific approach. It has to be logical. It has to be sound. And within that, we will adapt. We will adapt to the sound, logical systems that will promote and champion the social changes we need for a better future, to fix the existential issues that we find, to fix the injustices that we face and experience. And this becomes the long-term perspective of Compassiviste, so it can be successful over generations. Because our problems are not such that we can end tomorrow, unfortunately. There are problems that have a cure or can be healed within a very short period of time. But the social problem and the existential problem of humans, and in sequence and in consideration of the existential problem of humans, we have the existential crisis of many other species of animals and plants. To fix this and to reverse this and have harmony again on this planet, we need to consider the long-term approach. We're not doing this for the planet. The planet will survive us. The planet will probably flourish better without us. We're doing it so we tell the planet that we deserve a shot at an accountable and responsible representation of our species on this planet, along with all the other lives that this planet cares for, that nature cares for. So anybody who thinks they can be a part of that conversation, anybody who thinks they understand that conversation, they can join. And people who are willing to learn and maybe not understand the conversation yet, they should join because they will grow to learn how to make life better. And I think that is the ultimate part, making life better, bringing us to harmony. And I think there is nobody who does not understand that. So everybody can be a Compassiviste.
This has been a fun conversation, Ali, talking about the foundations of Compassiviste, what it means to be a Compassiviste, our tenets, and then ultimately what it means to activate and get involved And then I love the idea that we're going to be, over the next series of podcasts, sharing the message of other Compassivistes out there and what they're doing and how our Compassivistes listening today can get involved.
And Daniel, I want to thank you for being on the show. And I want to thank you for being one of the first Compassivistes out there. Congratulations. And hope we'll have a long and successful journey together.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been an amazing adventure so far, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Stay tuned to the next series of episodes where we highlight those Compassivistes and show you how you can become an active component in the Compassiviste program. Until then, have a great day, and talk to you then.